Chapter 3, Act 3, The Sage. Act 3, The Sage. Take that! Rydia landed a final blow upon the desert Sahajan's scaly red head and stumbled back as the monster let out a strangled cry and disintegrated into the sands, blowing away with the next burst of scorching wind. Rydia turned to Cecil with a proud grin. I can feel myself getting stronger, Cecil. I'm sure you'll be a warrior in no time flat, Cecil said dryly as sweat dripped down his temple. He reached for the flask the kind woman watching over Rosa had given him full of potion. What Rydia didn't know was that as she was busy hopping around and trying to strike the desert monsters with her minuscule steel rod, Cecil was draining his energy just trying to keep them alive by striking with his dark wave attack from afar. With Rydia flitting about like a butterfly in a garden, he couldn't risk raising his blade, but the girl would not heed his advice and stand still. He supposed some part of him should be grateful for her enthusiasm, but he was beginning to feel like taking Rydia with him through the underwater passage was the worst idea he had had yet. His second worst idea had been betraying his country not 24 hours ago and declaring himself a rebel with his best friend, who had now disappeared. So, things were not going all that great. I know a little bit of white magic, some black magic, and I can summon phantom beasts, of course, Rydia had been explaining to Cecil as they trekked north across Capo Desert to the entrance of the underground waterway that would take them to Damcyan. Phantom beasts as powerful as the titan that caused all those earthquakes? Cecil asked hopefully. Ah, not exactly, Rydia said. I'm afraid Titan only came out because I was very distressed about my mother. She and him were very close, you know. I hope to be able to summon him someday on my own, though. However, I can summon. She closed her eyes, her body glowing the familiar warm yellow Cecil saw when Titan was called. Chocobo. Suddenly, a large yellow chocobo, roughly 3 times the size of a normal one, came barreling through the desert, queehing and cawing as it ran up to Rydia and nearly knocked her over. She laughed as the chocobo, seeing there were no monsters to topple for his master, fluttered its flightless wings and burst into glittering dust, disappearing. Before Cecil could let out the scream of disbelief that had been building in his throat, they had been attacked by the desert Sahajan. As they continued, the dark entrance of the waterway now finally in sight after an hour of the unbearable desert heat, Rydia did all the talking. Cecil knew she was probably still nervous and shaken from the death of her mother not yet a day before, so he let her ramble on. She occasionally interrupted herself to reference the map that had also been given to them by the couple watching over Rosa. I have never left Mist before in my life. Of course, we villagers all knew of Prince Edward though. He was rumored to be as beautiful as a bard from yore. I certainly hope Damcyan will still help us even with the prince missing. And his fiancée too. I wonder who Miss Anna is. Probably a foreign princess from a faraway land. It's so romantic. Cecil, is Rosa your? Quiet, Cecil suddenly grunted, not able to take any more. Rydia stopped still in her tracks. They had reached the entrance to the waterway. Although Cecil could hear the expected dripping of water from the limestone ceilings and the gentle rush of the underground rivers, he could also pick up on a distinct shuffling and tapping. It would seem that they would not be alone in their journey through the waterway. He motioned with his hand for Rydia to stay silent, and then gestured for her to follow him. For once, she obeyed, falling in line behind him. Cecil kept his hand on the hilt of the dark blade as the cool, damp air welcomed them into the waterway. Straight ahead was a rotting wood bridge that led to an island and a dead end, while to the left there seemed a more suitable path. Gigantoads poked their huge, saucer-like eyes out from the water, trying to size up the new visitors. The shuffling noises were much more noticeable now, and Rydia let out a tiny gasp as she covered her mouth. Cecil's mind was racing. He had heard rumors of the undead wandering caves like these, zombie-like monsters that seemed like they would make these same exact sounds. They crossed a different wooden bridge, Cecil feeling the ancient structure sway gently under his feet as the water rushed through below. Around the corner there was yet another bridge, and at the end of it, an old man. He was dressed in billowing pink and purple robes, which swayed back and forth as he paced to the edge of the bridge and back, tapping his staff on the stone floor. His head was overwhelmed with white, bushy hair that stuck out at bizarre angles, and all that could be seen of his face from a distance was a large pair of purple glasses and a white beard that occupied the areas his hair did not reach. As he paced, puffy purple pants and little yellow boots jutted out of the robes. I must remember, he was muttering. Thundara! Thundara! How the bloody hell does one cast Thundara? Rydia looked up at Cecil as he shrugged and made his approach. While he resembled the bizarre, undead, this man seemed relatively harmless.
Excuse me,
Cecil's voice boomed through the echoing caverns as they crossed the bridge toward the man,
but we need to get through.
The man stopped muttering to himself and looked up at Cecil and Rydia. His eyes instantly locked onto the blade Cecil's fingers still clutched, and he gasped and suddenly fell to his knees, lowering his head and blubbering.
You're a knight. You wield the dark sword, do you not? I am begging you. Lend me your aid.
Cecil blinked, surprised. Once again, he was grateful no one could see his real face behind his helmet. At this point he would normally introduce himself as a Dark Knight of Baron, serving under his lordship King Baron, but... well, who was he, anymore?
What happened?
Cecil asked instead.
My daughter, Anna.
The old man cried.
She has been tricked by a silver-tongued bard of Damcyan and taken away to Damcyan Castle. I fear something sinister. I must go to Damcyan and find her before it is too late. I fear we have little time. Anna.
Rydia blinked.
Didn't we hear about her in the village, Cecil? Wasn't she Prince Edward's? Not now, Rydia,
Cecil chided. He lifted his hand as if to motion for the man to get up. The man slowly rose, his legs shaking, although Cecil could not tell if it was from old age or fear.
Anna, you said? We have heard of you. You must be Tella. The very same. I was pursuing my daughter through this passageway, but the way out is blocked by a great monster. Fearsome. The devil is strong, I warn you, and will not let me pass. My magic does nothing against it. But with your dark blade? And this girl? A summoner, is she not? And one who looks to have great potential. Together, we could do it.
Rydia raised her eyebrows. She was shocked at his perception, but said nothing. She suddenly had the feeling that this man was far more powerful than he was letting on. Cecil sighed. He couldn't just leave Tella here, and they technically both had the same goal, Damcyan. And the news of this monster suddenly complicated things even further. Perhaps Tella would have more information Cecil could get out of him later.
We are headed to Damcyan also,
Cecil began slowly,
so. Then the choice has already been made.
Tella exclaimed.
Let us make haste.
He threw his garish traveling capes back and turned, gesturing to Cecil and Rydia with his gnarled staff.
I know the quickest way to the exit. Let's just follow him, Cecil,
Rydia said gently as Cecil stood there in disbelief. What was with this guy? Was the world full of eccentrics like him and Rydia, or had Cecil just been lucky enough to run into both of them? Either way, he hoped Kane, wherever he was having better luck recruiting allies against Baron than he seemed to be. When Cecil marched to Baron with a 7-year-old girl and an ancient man who couldn't even remember a spell as elementary as Thundara, perhaps King Baron's troops would laugh themselves to death. The hours passed relatively peacefully as the three made their way through the waterway. Occasionally they would stumble upon abandoned treasures and weapons that other explorers left behind, and Rydia gasped happily as they crossed into a new cavern and Tella reached down behind a rock and handed her a glittering ice rod. It was a silver rod with a delicate sapphire at the top that sparkled with frost.
I found this in passing before, but it is of no use to me,
Tella explained.
You, young lady, should have it, and unlock more of your potential. I could learn Blizzard with this.
Rydia exclaimed happily.
Thank you so very much. I'll practice hard against the monsters with it.
She jumped up and down and hugged it to her chest.
I wonder why anyone would leave such a treasure behind.
Cecil looked at Tella to see how he would answer a question like that. It was obvious the rod had been left behind because someone had been forced to leave it when they were eaten alive by the undead creatures roaming about. But Tella just laughed and patted Rydia on the head.
My dear, as a black mage progresses, they must make efforts to pave the way for young black mages to follow them.
She seemed to find that answer perfectly acceptable and nodded as they started on their way again. Cecil sighed. Right now, more than ever, he missed the easy banter he shared with Kane and the comfortable silence he could fall into with Rosa as they sat next to each other and did nothing. Please, let them both be safe. Although they could not see the outside world, Cecil could sense when nightfall was approaching, as could Rydia, who was stumbling and tripping over rocks as she struggled to keep her eyes open. Tella assured them that they would soon be at a safe spot he found where no monsters would approach them for the evening. Eventually they wandered into a small enclave, where the remains of Tella's previous campfire sat, along with some crystal torches that glowed with an eerie blue light. Tella pulled out a small pack that had been hiding under his many layers of robes, and began to spread out blankets. He set out a wool one and invited Rydia to take it. She took out the small satchel of herbs the couple from Capo had given her, set it down to use as a pillow, and almost instantly fell asleep, clutching her new ice rod against her chest. Cecil watched wordlessly as Tella set another blanket out for Cecil, and then detached some of his many capes to use as blankets for himself. As they both sat down, Tella leaned over the remains of the campfire, muttered a few foreign words under his breath, and a small fire burst forth from the air, crackling as it fed on the dried sticks.
As long as we remain within the field of these crystals, the monsters will keep away,
Tella explained.
So rest easy tonight. We will have another long day tomorrow and we'll need to recover our strength to face that beast.
Cecil nodded. His mind was jumbled with so many thoughts, he could hardly comprehend what Tella was saying. Where is Kane right now? Was he captured by Baron? Did Rosa see him on her way to Capo? What possessed her to do something so dangerous? Was something threatening her back home? What did Kane mean in Mist when he said he
wasn't doing this for me?
Does Rydia truly forgive me for her mother's death? Does Tella have any clue that his daughter is betrothed to the Prince of Damcyan? Surely, he wouldn't take on the royal family, would he?
Fast asleep already?
Tella chuckled as he tucked a stray curl away from Rydia's face.
She must have been exhausted. This child. Where is she from?
Cecil snapped out of his reverie and cleared his throat.
She is a summoner from the village of Mist. Indeed.
Tella nodded.
Then my eyes were not mistaken. She has great potential. With practice and training, she should be able to master a variety of spells in her years. And such a darling little face. She reminds me of my Anna when she was young. Your daughter. My one and only.
Tella removed his glasses and closed his eyes, and Cecil could see the trickle of a tiny tear roll down Tella's rosy cheek.
Deceived by some wandering bard and taken away to Damcyan. All because I refused to give them my blessing.
Cecil looked away, as he couldn't bear to see a grown man cry. Tella heaved a sigh and Cecil could feel his eyes piercing the back of his neck.
And you? What business do you have in Damcyan? A friend of mine is suffering from desert fever in Capo,
Cecil said. He didn't feel the need to emphasize further. Tella seemed to understand.
Ah, yes, then you seek the sand ruby. Then haste drives you as well. But let me warn you. My magic could not even fell the foe you face. Tell me about this monster,
Cecil said, finally turning to look back at Tella. Talking about battle strategies and the like would give him some much-needed focus.
It's a gigantic beast with 8 riding tentacles,
Tella began.
The head is as big as you or I and it has a lovely row of razor blade-like teeth when it smiles. At least, I think it is smiling.
Cecil contemplated this new information.
And where is it? In the lake that leads to the exit of this waterway. If it is a beast that lives in the water, surely a thunder spell would do the trick.
What little Cecil knew of the principles of magic and monsters he had learned from Rosa.
It is not so easy,
Tella sighed.
My magic? Well, it has been weakening, even I can admit that. And my more powerful spells. They just aren't coming to me anymore. I struggle recalling most of them. That is why I thought with your dark blade and the summoner's power. Understood.
Cecil lifted off his helmet and shook out his hair, setting it down beside his hip.
I have a plan. If it has 8 tentacles doing the dirty work, then we shall have to just take them out all at the same time. I will use my dark wave to strike them all at once, you will cast a thunder spell to strike as well, and Rydia will summon a chocobo to attack the head and keep it distracted while staying safely out of harm's way. I am confident we will triumph. Brilliant, it's brilliant.
Tella cheered triumphantly.
I feel like we have won already. Don't get cocky,
Cecil warned, laying down and closing his eyes.
The tide of fate can turn against us at any time. I know that all too well at this point.
The next morning, after the threesome had awoken and shared a meager breakfast from Tella's preserves, Cecil explained the plan again so that Rydia could understand her role.
And remember, you must stay as far away as possible,
Cecil said firmly.
Let Chocobo do all the work, okay? Just concentrate, or whatever it is you must do to keep him in battle. Yes, Cecil.
Rydia nodded seriously.
I'll do my very best. Let's head out then,
Cecil ordered, and everyone scrambled to pack up the campsite. After another 3 hours of tireless hiking, climbing, and monster battling, Cecil saw his first traces of sunlight in a day, streaming through the mouth of the passageway they were in. As they stepped into the hot sun, Rydia collapsed in the grass and let out a sigh.
It feels so good to be above ground again. Well my dear, we still have one more cave to go,
Tella explained,
and that is where Octomammoth lives. Let's hurry,
Cecil urged, looking out over the horizon of the mountainside.
By the looks of it, it's already nearly noon.
Tella led them across the green field to yet another cave opening steeped in darkness. As they stepped in, Cecil could hear the distinct roar of a waterfall right below them. Tella pushed open a rotting door that was barely hanging its rusty hinges, and the group found themselves at the ledge of a massive waterfall. Although the water looked gentle enough, the area was so open that the echoes bounced around and made it sound like Chocobo Falls near Baron.
How do we get down?
Cecil asked.
I don't have any rope on me. Mine was washed away the last time I descended,
Tella explained.
So I guess that means we'll simply have to jump. What?
Rydia cried, but Cecil shrugged it off and took her hand.
Just hold on to me, okay? You'll be fine. It doesn't look so bad.
Rydia turned as green as her curls as Cecil spoke, and proceeded to climb up his back. She really didn't like heights. Cecil secured her legs and looked over at Tella.
You ready? Anna is waiting, I have to be ready. Okay. On the count of 3,
Cecil ordered.
1, 2, 3.
Cecil leapt off the edge of the cliff right into the waterfall, a stream of cold water rushing into his armor as they fell. Rydia's screams were drowned out by the sound of the water, but she clung on so tight Cecil could swear her shoes were leaving dents in his armor. What felt like seconds later, the group splashed into the pond below, Cecil and Rydia plunging underwater before bobbing back up for air. Cecil coughed and pulled off his helmet, shaking his head as Rydia gasped for breath and immediately began scrambling for land. Tella popped up a few seconds later, reaching up to wring the water out of his beard.
Well, that wasn't so bad at all.
Tella laughed. Cecil grunted and fastened his helmet back on. Before he could let himself get too annoyed, he felt something heavy and wet smack him so hard in the back of his helmet that his ears rang. He cried out and fell forward in the water as Rydia screamed, "Cecil!
Octomammoth!"
Tella gasped.
He's here.
Cecil tried to regain his composure, but it sounded like morning bells were going off inside his head. He felt Tella grab his hand and pull him onto land as something slimy and orange swung over their heads. Cecil flipped open the visor on his helmet and took it all in. The gigantic, 8-limbed beast was flailing about just yards away in the deepest part of the water, the suction cups on its tentacles as big as Cecil's hand. A mouth of ugly, yellow, leering teeth came poking out of the water, and the Octomammoth's big white eyeballs rolled around in its head as it took in the intruders. Cecil quickly looked back to make sure Rydia was safe. She had escaped to a lone island in the middle of the pond, far enough from Octomammoth's reach. Her eyes were closed and she was glowing, with green crystal-like bubbles beginning to form at her hands. Cecil could hear the whistling sound of another tentacle ripping through the air before he could see it, and instinctively flipped backwards out of the way just in time.
"Begin the attack!"
Cecil cried, and unsheathed his blade. As he began to summon the dark energy from within, he could hear Tella casting a chain of spells in rapid succession.
Thunder! Thunder! Thunder!
Bursts of lightning rained down upon each of the tentacles, causing them to curl in agony as the head of the beast gnashed his teeth in anger. Cecil could feel the power of his attack building, but it was going much slower than usual. He could feel it creeping up from his core through his arms, to finally his fingertips, but the sword felt unbearably heavy, like he was about to drop it. His muscles felt like they were on fire and being torn apart. What the hell is going on with me? Cecil wondered, closing his eyes tight. Why can't I just summon the dark wave like usual?
Go, Chocobo!
Rydia cried, and the massive bird bolted past Cecil and Tella, lowering its neck and head-butting Octomammoth square between the eyes. Octomammoth let out a roar and rolled its eyes back, its tentacles swaying even more recklessly.
The beast is weakening!
Tella cried.
Keep it up! But keep your guard up as well. A wounded beast is a dangerous one.
Come on, they are counting on you. Cecil took a deep breath and finally managed to swing his sword, an aura of black and purple bursting from the blade as it raced towards Octomammoth and began to cut into its tentacles like knives, slicing them in half, and at last, reaching the head. A curved blade of purple light sliced straight through the middle of the head, causing the top half to fall into the water while the mouth screamed in agony. The remains of the tentacles began to shrivel up, and the beast sank slowly into the water, fat bubbles rising as it disappeared. Cecil dug his sword into the ground and clung to it for dear life, catching his breath as Tella and Rydia ran to each other and began jumping up and down.
We did it, we did it. We did it. Cecil,
Rydia called, scrambling over to him and throwing her arms around his waist.
Let's get out of here, quick. Indeed.
Tella nodded, and pointed past where the octomammoth had fought its last battle, beyond the waterfall.
The exit is here.
Cecil was the last one to jump into the water to swim over to the exit. As he sheathed his blade and tried to regain his breath, he could hear that same voice he heard before in the throne room when he had challenged King Baron's authority over the crystals. You can't keep this up much longer. The more you turn to the dark blade. Outside of the exit of the waterway, they just had a short walk over the much-trodden pathway through the prairie to Castle Damcyan. It stood tall and elegant against the light blue sky, Damcyan's blue and white flags beating in the gentle breeze. Damcyan Castle had been constructed from the most beautiful white marble ore that could be mined as a gift from the first King Damcyan to the woman he had wanted to become his queen, so the castle was known all over the world for its delicate beauty, as opposed to Kingdom Baron, whose castle housed a small army and was much more militaristic in stature.
Tella, who exactly are going to see about the bard that took Anna?
Cecil asked.
Only the royal family and their closest followers live here, right? The bard is hiding Anna in the castle, thus the king and queen must know of his whereabouts,
Tella huffed, his face getting that same red glow as before when he first explained his dilemma to Cecil and Rydia.
Do not be alarmed, Cecil, I will make sure you find a member of the royal family to take you to the Antlion Cave first before starting any ruckus. Not really what I am worried about.
Cecil trailed off when he heard the sound of thunder in the distance. The three of them paused and looked up. There was no way a storm could be on the horizon, not in this weather.
Oh!
Rydia cried, point up toward the sky.
Is that an airship?
Sure enough, an airship was gliding over their heads towards Damcyan. Of course, Cecil recognized this particular airship right away. It was painted deep crimson and flying the Baron flag. It was a member of the Red Wings fleet.
What in the world are the Red Wings doing at Damcyan?
Tella asked, when suddenly a pair of additional ships flew over them, followed by two more pairs that totaled the 7 ships that made up the Red Wings. As the ships neared Damcyan Castle, bursts of glittering red light and smoke began to emit from the skies above, and Cecil felt his heart drop into his stomach as he watched it all unfold before his eyes in slow motion. The Red Wings were bombing Damcyan Castle. Bursts of smoke and fire exploded from the White Palace as the Red Wings flew above, and towers collapsed into dust in what felt like seconds. Even though the explosions were deafening, Cecil could still swear he heard the collective screams of the people trapped inside the palace. The first airship to arrive on the scene briefly dipped down toward the burning palace. After making just one full sweep around the palace perimeters, the other Red Wings turned and started to sail southwest, towards Baron. A few moments later, the ship that had paused for whatever reason rose back into the sky and followed suit. The chill of the ship's shadow as it passed over Cecil made him collapse, and he felt his knees sink into the dusty path they had been following. Ahead of them, just a few seconds ago, had been Castle Damcyan. Now what remained was a burning, smoking pile of filthy rubble.
Oh my god!
Rydia cried, and began to run towards the palace. Tella ran after her, screaming Anna!
Anna!
Over and over. Cecil willed away the stinging sensation in his eyes and climbed back to his feet, running as hard as he ever had in his life. End of chapter. Chapter end.